The trunk didn't open all the way, and Daniel didn't look surprised. That's when Lena realized this wasn't an accident. It stopped halfway, like something inside was blocking it. Daniel didn't react. He just stood there, one hand gripping the edge, his face unreadable in the dim light, like this moment, this exact moment, had already played out in his mind. Lena felt her chest tighten, because whatever was in there, he wasn't surprised by it. And that was the first thing that truly scared her. But the question isn't what was inside the trunk. Not yet. The real question is this: how did Lena, careful, observant Lena, end up standing in the middle of nowhere, helping the man she loved hide something she didn't understand? Because this didn't start with fear. It started with trust. And trust is always where the most dangerous stories begin. But what no one realized was, by the time Lena started asking herself questions, she had already ignored too many answers. A few months earlier, everything felt simple, predictable, safe. Lena lived a quiet life, structured, controlled. She liked knowing how things would go, liked routines that didn't surprise her. Work, home, a small circle of people she trusted. She wasn't lonely, but she wasn't exactly fulfilled either. And then, Daniel walked into her life. Not dramatically, not in a way that demanded attention. He just appeared. Soft-spoken, attentive. The kind of man who didn't try to impress you. He made you feel like you were the one worth impressing. And for Lena, that was disarming. What Lena didn't know yet was Daniel didn't just enter her life. He studied it. He noticed everything. The pauses in her speech, the way she hesitated before answering certain questions, the small cracks in her otherwise controlled world. And slowly, carefully, he filled them. At first, it felt like coincidence. He liked the same music, shared the same opinions, even finished her sentences sometimes, something she would normally find irritating, but with him, it felt like connection, like being understood. And that's how it began. Not with intensity, but with comfort. And comfort is much harder to question. Then there was Adrian. Adrian had been in Lena's life long before Daniel. A friend, technically, but like most things in Lena's world, it wasn't that simple. They had history, unfinished conversations, moments that almost turned into something more, but never quite did. Still, he mattered, and Daniel noticed that immediately. To Daniel, Adrian was never just a friend. He saw him as a variable, something that needed to be controlled. At first, it was subtle, a comment here and there. Do you think he respects your boundaries? He seems a little too involved. Nothing aggressive, nothing obvious, just enough to make Lena think. And once she started thinking, she couldn't stop. Because doubt, once planted, doesn't need much to grow. Within weeks, she found herself pulling back from Adrian, replying less, canceling plans, convincing herself it was for the best, that she was choosing peace, choosing Daniel. But what she didn't see was how carefully that choice had been guided. And then came the night everything shifted. Adrian had asked to see her, said it was important. His message was short, but something about it felt urgent. Reluctantly, she agreed. They met at his apartment, and from the moment she walked in, something felt off. Not dangerous, just tense. Adrian wasn't himself. He paced more than usual, checked his phone constantly, like he was waiting for something he couldn't control. And then he said it. "I don't think Daniel is who you think he is." The words landed harder than she expected. Lena laughed, instinctively, not because it was funny, but because it felt absurd. Daniel? The man who remembered everything about her? The man who made her feel safe? But Adrian didn't smile, didn't backtrack. He stepped closer instead. "I've been looking into him." And that's when the unease crept in. because Adrian wasn't the type to make things up. He told her things didn't add up, that Daniel's past was inconsistent, that there were gaps, missing pieces, stories that didn't quite line up when you looked closely enough. But what no one realized was Lena had already made her decision before Adrian even finished speaking. Because loving someone doesn't just make you see the good in them, it makes you reject anything that threatens that image. And Adrian had just become a threat. She left that night frustrated, defensive, already building arguments in her head to protect Daniel. But Lena wasn't the only one aware of that conversation. Daniel knew. He always seemed to know. And when she told him, expecting confusion or even anger, he gave her something worse. Disappointment. "You believe him?" The way he said it, quiet, almost hurt, made her feel like she had done something wrong just by listening. And that was enough. Because Lena didn't want to be the person who doubted him, didn't want to lose what they had. So she reassured him, defended him, chose him. And just like that, the line between truth and loyalty blurred. If you're still listening, just understand this. Sometimes the most important decisions aren't the loud ones. They're the quiet ones. The ones where you convinced yourself you're doing the right thing. Because 2 days later, Adrian disappeared. At first, no one panicked. He wasn't predictable, had a habit of going off the grid for a while. But this felt different. His phone was off, his messages unread, and his apartment untouched. Lena told herself it was nothing, that he'd be back, that this didn't mean anything. But something in her chest refused to settle. And Daniel? He was calm. Too calm. He probably just needed space, he said. Simple, logical, reassuring. What seemed small at the time, reassurance can sometimes be the most dangerous thing of all, because it stops you from asking questions. And Lena stopped asking. At least, for a while.
Right around here, if you find yourself drawn into stories like this, stories where small choices lead to irreversible consequences, make sure you're following along, because this is only the beginning, and it only gets darker from here. The next night, Daniel asked her for help, casually, like it wasn't a big deal. He said he needed to move something, heavy, that he couldn't do it alone. And Lena, still holding on to trust, still pushing down the unease, agreed. No questions, no hesitation. Because love had already done what it does best. It had made the unreasonable feel reasonable. The drive was long, silent. Daniel barely spoke, his focus locked on the road, his grip on the steering wheel just a little too tight. And Lena sat beside him, staring out into the darkness, trying to ignore the growing feeling in her chest, that something wasn't right, that something had already gone wrong. But what she didn't realize was, this wasn't the beginning of something bad. It was the middle of something much worse. When they finally stopped, the place felt wrong immediately. Isolated, quiet in a way that didn't feel natural, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own breathing. Daniel stepped out first, walked to the back of the car, paused, then looked at her. "Can you help me?" 4 simple words, and Lena nodded, because at this point, saying no didn't feel like an option anymore. She walked toward him slowly, every step heavier than the last, and as he lifted the trunk again, this time forcing it open, Lena felt something inside her shift, because whatever she was about to see wouldn't just change how she saw Daniel, it would change what she had already become. And as her eyes adjusted to the darkness inside, she realized she wasn't just helping him anymore. She was already involved. The first thing Lena noticed was the silence. Not outside, inside, her. Because whatever she had expected to feel in that moment, fear, panic, even shock, None of it came the way it should have. It was like her mind had gone still just to survive what her eyes were trying to process. The trunk was open now, fully, and Daniel stepped back, giving her space to see. What she couldn't see in that moment, he wasn't stepping back out of hesitation. He was watching her reaction, carefully, measuring it. Lena moved closer, slowly, like if she took her time, it might somehow change what was there. But it didn't, because inside the trunk was a shape, not clear, not fully visible, wrapped, still, wrong in a way that her mind refused to fully accept. And for a brief second, she almost asked the question, almost said it out loud. But she didn't, because saying it would make it real, and reality meant everything would change. So instead, she looked at Daniel, waiting, hoping irrationally that he would explain it in a way that made sense. And he did speak, but not in the way she needed. He showed up. 4 words, simple, controlled, and somehow enough. Because what no one realized was Lena didn't need the truth in that moment. She needed a reason to stay, and Daniel gave her one. He didn't panic, didn't rush. He spoke softly, carefully, like someone explaining something complicated to a person they didn't want to lose. He showed up, Daniel said. He wouldn't leave it alone. He didn't say Adrian's name, but he didn't have to. Lena's stomach tightened, because suddenly the pieces started aligning in a way she didn't want them to. The meeting, the accusations, the disappearance, and now this. But what she didn't realize was Daniel wasn't just explaining, he was guiding her toward a conclusion, one that would make this easier to accept. He was gonna ruin everything, Daniel continued, for both of us. For both of us. That was the detail that mattered, because it turned this from something Daniel did into something that affected her too. And that's when the shift happened. Not all at once, not dramatically, but quietly, dangerously. Lena nodded, just once, and in that small movement, she crossed a line she didn't even fully see, because now this wasn't just his problem, it was theirs. And that's where things started to change, because once you accept even part of something like this, it becomes harder to reject the rest. "Help me," Daniel said. And this time, it wasn't a question. The next hour passed in fragments, moments Lena would later struggle to piece together in the right order. The cold air, the sound of something being dragged, the weight of silence between them. She didn't ask questions, didn't look too closely, because her mind had already chosen survival over truth. But what no one realized was denial doesn't erase reality. It just delays the moment it catches up to you. And it was already catching up. By the next morning, Adrian was officially reported missing. It started with a friend, a call that went unanswered, then another, then concern, and concern turned into action. Police visited his apartment, spoke to neighbors, checked the basics. At first, it looked like nothing. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, just absence. By then, it was already too late. Absence can be the loudest clue of all. Because people don't just disappear, not without leaving something behind, and Adrian had left more than people expected. His phone records showed his last known contact, Lena. That alone wasn't suspicious, not yet. But then came something else. A neighbor reported hearing voices the night Adrian disappeared. Not shouting, not arguing, just tense. Unusual enough to remember. And suddenly, Lena wasn't just someone connected to Adrian. She was someone who might have been there. But what she didn't realize was the timeline was already tightening around her.
When the police first approached her, she was calm, or at least, she looked calm. She told them the truth, at least part of it, that she'd seen Adrian, that they talked, that she left. And everything after that, she didn't know. It was clean, simple, believable, and for a moment, it worked. What seemed small at the time, investigations don't rely on what you say, they rely on what you miss. Because while Lena was focused on keeping her story straight, Daniel was already adjusting his. And that difference, it mattered more than either of them understood. If you're still here, just remember this. Most people think investigations are about big breakthroughs. They're not. They're about small cracks, tiny inconsistencies that don't seem important until they are. And those cracks, they were already forming. Security footage from a nearby street placed Daniel's car in the area that night. Not unusual on its own, but combined with everything else, it started to build a pattern. Then there was the timing. His phone had been off for a period that matched Adrian's disappearance, a detail easy to explain, unless it repeats. And it had. What no one couldn't see in that moment, the most important detail hadn't even been discovered yet. Not by the police, not by Lena. Because Lena was still trying to convince herself of something else entirely. That this wasn't what it looked like. That there was still some version of events where Daniel wasn't the person this situation suggested he was. And Daniel, he reinforced that every chance he got. "You did the right thing," he told her. "You protected us." Us. That word again, binding her to him, making distance feel like betrayal. And slowly, Lena stopped questioning, stopped replaying that night, stopped thinking about Adrian as a person, and started thinking about him as a problem that had already been dealt with. But what she didn't realize was, the world outside her denial was still moving, still digging, still getting closer. Because a few days later, something was found. Not a body, not yet, but something connected, something that didn't belong where it was discovered, and it changed everything. Police didn't release the details immediately, but internally, the case shifted from missing person to something else, something heavier. And that's when they came back to Lena. This time, the questions were different. Sharper, more specific, less patient. And for the first time, Lena felt it, the pressure, the weight of something closing in. Because now, it wasn't just about what she knew, it was about what she was hiding. The truth was already unfolding. Lena wasn't the only one being watched. Daniel was too. And the more they looked at him, the less his story held together. Small details, overlooked at first, now standing out. And then, one piece of evidence surfaced, something from Daniel's past, something that hadn't come up before, something that made investigators pause, because it suggested something far more disturbing than a single isolated incident. It suggested a pattern. And as that information began to unfold, one question started to take shape. Not just about what happened to Adrian, but about Daniel himself, who he really was, and how much of this had happened before. But what Lena didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know yet, was that the man she thought she was protecting might not have needed her help for the first time. And as investigators prepared to dig deeper into Daniel's past, a new possibility emerged, one that changed everything. Because if it was true, then Adrian was never the real target. The truth didn't come all at once. It never does. It came in pieces, small, quiet fragments that didn't seem connected until suddenly they were. And by the time Lena understood what those pieces meant, there was no version of her life left that didn't include what she had done. The line had already been crossed. The biggest lie in this entire story wasn't what Daniel said, it was what Lena chose to believe. The investigators didn't confront her immediately, not with everything. They didn't need to, because pressure isn't about force, it's about timing.
and Lena was already starting to crack. The second interview felt different, colder, more precise. They asked about that night again, the timeline, the drive, the small details she thought didn't matter. And this time, she hesitated, just for a second. But that was enough, because hesitation is where truth begins to surface. "We know you went back out that night," one of them said calmly. Not accusing, certain. Lena felt her throat tighten, because she hadn't told them that part, not directly. And suddenly, the room felt smaller. But what she didn't realize was, they weren't guessing anymore. They were building, and they already had more than she thought. The car had been seen again, hours after she claimed she was home, further out, near a location that didn't connect to anything in her story. Except, it did. She just hadn't realized it yet. Because that place, that isolated, empty stretch of land, had already been searched, and what they found there changed everything. It wasn't obvious at first, nothing dramatic, just disturbed ground, subtle, but deliberate. And beneath it, the truth Lena had been avoiding. The timeline was already tightening. Even then, she still didn't know the full story. Not yet. Because when the investigators shifted their focus to Daniel's past, a pattern began to emerge. Not clear, not complete, but enough to raise a question that reframed everything. There had been someone else, months before Lena. Another woman, another life Daniel had quietly stepped into. And just like with Lena, he had become everything she needed. Attentive, understanding, safe, until suddenly, he wasn't. She hadn't disappeared, not officially, but she had left, abruptly, cut contact with everyone, changed her number, moved without telling anyone where. At least, that's what it looked like. It felt harmless at the time. There were inconsistencies there too, gaps, unanswered questions, and Daniel's connection to her? Conveniently incomplete. That's when the investigation shifted. Because Adrian wasn't the beginning, he was the interruption. The moment something Daniel had carefully maintained started to unravel. And Lena? She wasn't just someone who got pulled into this. She was chosen, but not in the way she thought. If you've made it this far, just understand this. Some people don't look for love. They look for leverage. And Daniel had been building something long before Lena ever met him. When they brought her in again, everything felt different. Not just the room, not just the questions. Her. Because now, doubt wasn't something she was avoiding, it was something she couldn't escape. They showed her pieces, carefully. Photos, timelines, fragments of a story she hadn't been allowed to see before. And then they asked her something simple. Did he ever tell you about her? Her. Not a name, just a presence. And Lena shook her head, slowly. Because no, he hadn't. And that was the moment something inside her finally shifted. Because love doesn't leave out pieces like that, not unless those pieces matter. But what she didn't realize was, there was still one more truth waiting, one that changed everything she knew about that night. Because Adrian hadn't just been suspicious, he had been right. Not about everything, but about enough. He had been looking into Daniel, digging, closer than anyone else had gotten before. And what he found? He told Lena, that night, in fragments, details she dismissed, warnings she ignored. But now, those words came back, clearer, sharper. I don't think he's done this before. Not capable, not dangerous, done this before. And suddenly, Lena remembered something she hadn't thought about since that night. Something small, something she had overlooked. Adrian's phone. He had been recording, not openly, hidden. And when investigators recovered it, they found the last piece, the part Lena had never heard, the part that came after she left. Daniel's voice, calm,
controlled. Standing in that same apartment, speaking to Adrian, not arguing, not panicked, certain. You should have left it alone. And then, silence. She didn't question it then. That recording didn't just confirm what happened, it confirmed how. Because there was no chaos, no loss of control. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't self-defense. It was a decision. And Lena had helped cover it up. Not out of fear, not because she was forced, but because she chose to believe him. That was the truth, the full truth. And when it finally settled in, there was no version of it that didn't break her. Right around here, if you're still following this story, take a second to sit with that, because what comes next isn't about mystery anymore. It's about consequence. Daniel was arrested first, calm as ever, no resistance, no panic, just that same unreadable expression, like he had already accepted the outcome, like this was just another part of the story. Lena wasn't arrested immediately, not at first, because her role was more complicated. By then, it was already too late. Complicity doesn't disappear just because it's emotional. She had helped. She had stayed. She had chosen not to see. And in the end, that choice had a cost. The trial wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. It was slow, methodical. Piece by piece, the story was laid out. Not just what Daniel did, but how Lena became part of it. And the hardest part wasn't the evidence. It was the moments in between. The messages, the conversations, the quiet ways she defended him, even when something felt wrong. Because those moments showed something deeper than guilt. They showed how easily love can be reshaped into something dangerous. Daniel was convicted. The evidence was too clear, too consistent. And Lena faced her own consequences, not as the one who started it, but as the one who helped finish it. The line had already been crossed. The punishment that stayed with her the longest wasn't the legal one. It was the memory, the moment at the trunk, the second she chose not to ask questions, because that was the moment everything became irreversible. Years later, people would still ask the same question. How could she not know? But that's the wrong question. The real question is, how much did she choose not to see? Because in the end, this wasn't just a story about a crime. It was a story about how love, when placed in the wrong hands, doesn't just blind you, it changes you. And sometimes, by the time you finally see the truth, you're already part of it. If you believe Lena truly didn't know what she was getting into at first, or if deep down she always sensed something was wrong, what do you think? If you believe love can blind someone this extent, or if there's always a moment where you can still choose to walk away, where do you stand? And now I want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because in stories like this, there's never just one way to see the truth. If this story kept you hooked, don't forget to like, share it with someone who loves chilling true crime stories, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that stay with you long after they end. Because the next one might be even darker.